I'm Lisa Gable, and in my life, I've been blessed with amazing opportunities. From working in the White House at 21 to running some of the most impactful global organizations. I've had the incredible fortune to learn from and work with remarkable women who blazed a trail before me. From ingenuity, I learned to demand unity of purpose. From former Air Force Secretary Barbara Barrett, I learned to replace myself with another woman when exiting a high-level position. Women helping women is how we solve tough problems, whether it's giving voice to food allergy moms to mentoring our rising leaders. On this inspiring interview series, I have the privilege of sharing the wisdom from some of the most remarkable women on the planet. Women I'm proud to call my friends and colleagues. Their advice is priceless, so join me right now for another inspirational conversation. This is Breakthrough. Today's episode is about the empowering of women to the highest levels of confidence. Joining me today is Dr. Bernice Ledbetter, who serves as Dean of Students and Alumni Affairs at the Pepperdine Graziadio Business School. She is the founding director of the Center for Women's Leadership and serves as a practitioner faculty of organizational theory and practice, where she teaches graduate level courses in leadership across a range of leadership topics. She's an award-winning teacher and recipient of the 2019 Trailblazer Award from Leadership California, the Howard A. White Award for Teaching Excellence, and the George Award for Outstanding Faculty Member. Dr. Ledbetter, please introduce yourself and the top message you want to convey today.
Lisa, thank you so much for that gracious introduction. My goodness, when you hear the things that you've done, you think, how has that been possible? And it's always so humbling to hear that. I am so delighted to be with you. I have been introduced to you. I think the only other thing that I would share is that I'm a proud grandmother of two beautiful granddaughters, and I live here in Southern California and love it. And I'm excited for us today to talk about empowering women, to help women achieve the highest levels of leadership and to make that a priority in our work.
Well, great. Well, we are very excited to talk with you because at FAIR, we have so many different food allergy moms who've really advanced in social media. Some have started businesses, others are doing consulting. It's really been fantastic to see our moms do the great work that they're doing. So we're hoping that this information is useful to them. You know, it was wonderful because you and I met through our mutual friend, Karen Merrick, who's been a friend of mine for 20 years and has been, I think, one of your closest friends for a really long time. And we bonded over our commitment to women's leadership. In fact, one of the things that we're both a member of is an organization called Chief, and Chief is a network of powerful women across the United States who've come together to help each other be successful and to really amplify the success of women. And so I'm very excited to meet you through these two common relationships.
That's right. Karen Merrick is one of my dearest friends. I'm godmother to her firstborn, and she's been an important, really, I would say, sister by a different mother in my life. And I owe such a debt of gratitude to her. And so anyone that is connected with Karen is immediately someone that I want to spend time with and get to know. So it's a pleasure to be with you again today, Lisa. And yes, our common shared bond through the organization Chief is extraordinary. That's been an empowering, enlightening, learning and networking opportunity for me personally. And that's why I joined. I really wanted to do something for myself and to increase my network beyond the realm of higher education. And I wanted to experience peer mentoring. And that has absolutely happened through Chief.
Yeah, the peer mentoring piece is so important. And again, that's something that we see in our own community. So it's wonderful to see women who recognize that we all need mentors at different points in times. And it doesn't matter how old you are, we all seem to be going through inflection points and changes. And so doing something that we've never done before, I wrote a book, that's something I haven't done before. So I had to ask a lot of people's opinions, and it's wonderful to have that cohort of women. And so along that line, you talk about gender disruption and the fourth industrial revolution, which sounds very impressive. And you talk about building your confidence and instilling the strongest sense of competency and readiness for the challenges and rewards of leadership. What are the top one or two things that you recommend to women that you're training, that you're mentoring, both at Pepperdine and other places that you're involved with?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question, Lisa. Yes, I think what's interesting in the literature is that women oftentimes feel competent, like they know how to do the work that they're engaged in, kind of the how of leading, but they lack confidence, which is a really interesting phenomenon. And I think many of us have experienced that as survivor, or sorry, as imposter syndrome, and wondered, am I up for it? And I think one of the things that's important to realize is that confidence is really built from within, and it manifests in action. And so we build our confidence by the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and we listen to our own still voice that tells us that we are enough. I think also connected to that, then leadership equally begins from the inside out. It's kind of who we are as persons is how we lead. And so it becomes important to understand, who are you at your best? I think that's one of the ways to build confidence. And so one of the tips that I would encourage women to consider is to think about, what are the conditions and the factors that help you to perform at your best? Think about that. That's a reflective exercise. It's really thinking about a time when you were your best as a leader, a leadership high point experience, and diagnose that and figure out what it takes for you to be at the top of your game.
It's wonderful advice because I know that there are things that we look at other people's resumes, we look at what other people are doing, we look at what other organizations are doing, and we think, oh, should we be doing that? Maybe I need to check those marks off the box. But what I've learned as I've gotten older is that when you align your leadership style with your core competency, which makes you unique as an individual, and you build that out as your unique proposition, it really does enable you to become the leader you were meant to be.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I think some of the folks that I work with, some of the young women, oftentimes kind of struggle to know, where am I at my best? Sort of what is that? And so it takes a little bit of time, oftentimes, and experience to figure out, who am I at my best, and what are my core strengths? And I think that's where mentoring can come in and be really, really helpful, because oftentimes, I think most of the time, we need an outside perspective that helps us understand that. I remember there was a time, again, I've been in higher education my whole life, because one of the things I discovered early on is that I love learning. As long as I'm learning, I'm living. And when I cease to learn, I start to die. And so I've always been in school my entire life. I've either been in school as a student or worked at a school. And I studied with a professor, a really renowned professor. And I remember one time in particular, he told me, "You are so good at what you do." And that I have never forgotten, because for hearing that from him meant so much to me. And it made me think, you know what? I am competent. I can do this. I do have enough. All I need to do is take action on it. And so I think the mentors, whether it's momentary or long-term, really provide us with the feedback that we need to develop our leadership to its highest potential.
Absolutely. And I have a lot of conversations with my daughter, who's a 23-year-old teacher. And it's one of the things that we have discussed is the reality is you go through all these testing periods in your early 20s during your first job so you can figure out what that skill is where you really excel. And then you follow that path. I want to pivot us into a different line of conversation, which is business leadership for peace. You have written about establishing the purpose of leadership as peace, and you speak about a model of resistance leadership grounded in moral imagination. So, what are the top 2 or 3 things that business women and men can benefit from this conversation too, can do better to help solve complex problems or wicked challenges of the future when the two sides maintain different opinions, whether from a multinational perspective or even within our own communities? And then the other question I have, I'm going to ask a lot of questions on this one because it's a big topic, is why is it important to develop a professional culture of peace and inclusion?
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you so much for those great questions. Yes, I started kind of exploring this notion of leadership for peace because of a renowned colleague who really kind of threw down the gauntlet and asked us as scholars and teachers of leadership, leadership for what? We have spent so much time defining leadership style and leadership competencies, even leadership values, but leadership for what? And she suggested, we really need to tackle big, challenging areas like peace. And so I started thinking about that and doing some research and some writing on leadership, business leadership for peace, and really found some fascinating examples and ideas about how business can advance peace in the world, because business plays an incredible role in society. Business has a lot of power and a lot of resources and therefore a lot of influence in society. And we know that business prospers during peaceful times. It's difficult to conduct business when there are not peaceful conditions. And so I think that this has been a topic that I've really, really enjoyed exploring and continue to explore to this very day. And it's important to remember that peace is not necessarily the absence of conflict, but rather it's a state of mutual understanding rather than a kind of dualistic perspective. And I think this gets to some of the questions that you're asking is, when we operate from a dualism of one party's right and the other party's wrong, we don't get very far. And so business does a great job of helping to establish compromise, collaboration, innovation, which are all constructs of peace. And I think that peace is really about, also in the organizational context, even embracing things like empathy, optimism, forgiveness, and cultural awareness and appreciation. It's about taking a holistic point of view, and it's also about building trust and humility. Now, these sound like the virtues that Aristotle talked about, and virtues that maybe we were taught as children, but sometimes kind of drift away. And so business can use its capacity for moral imagination to reinvigorate some of the virtues that I think are really, really critically needed, especially right now. Coming out of this pandemic, people are feeling a lot of, a variety of emotions. We've all experienced trauma to some degree. And so the capacity for compassion and forgiveness and long suffering is going to be very, very important as we migrate back into our workplaces, however that takes form and function. And so I think that the idea of peace and leadership and business is something that I think has some real cachet going forward into the future. And so I think that what business women and men can do to advance peace in the workplace is some of these ideas related to virtues, but also thinking about how we connect to our communities, right? Sometimes we call that corporate CSR. How do we as business leaders and the organizations that we run and operate, how do we see ourselves as actors in the community to advance progress, to create possibility? In other words, not seeing ourselves as a separate entity, but as an integral part of the communities where we operate, and taking responsibility for that presence in the community to offer resources, whatever form that may take. That can be anything from volunteerism to mentoring to other kinds of things. I think when business does that, and the leaders who run businesses take that kind of responsibility, incredible possibilities exist.
It really does. I mean, when I was brought into FAIR in 2018, one of the reasons that I was hired is to bring business to the table. And
That's
so
right.
we've engaged with agricultural companies, with tech companies, with CPG, which are consumer product goods companies, food and beverage manufacturers, with biotech, with pharma. And in the food allergy space, what we know is that it's such a complex issue, yet at the same time, each one of those businesses could actually do something that would dramatically change both the lives of individuals as well as create new therapies and diagnostics for the space. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that business has to be at the table. We need to work together. The resources that businesses have isn't something that we can ignore. And the reality is those individuals with whom you're working, they're still people. And so, in our case, what we discover as at one company at Target is that there are a lot of food allergy parents, and we've discovered those at JP Morgan and other companies. And so finding ways to both achieve business objectives and meet societal needs, I agree with you, is something that is critically important for us. We've seen it happen in the United States, in our local communities, in our community of food allergies, but also internationally. And so I love having that combination of conversation. Let me again do another pivot into another line of conversation, which is around team performance. So you're an amazing mentor. You focused your professional career on organizational management. And post-pandemic, all organizations are really struggling to maintain cultural norms while meeting our strategic goals. And at the same time, we're all physically and emotionally exhausted after many, many months of COVID. And this reentry hasn't really been as easy as all of us hope. Do you have two basic operating principles that you're guiding organizations around and telling them that this is a way to really get people together? In our case, advocates, scientists, educators, during this time period of significant change.
Such an important question for our time. Yes, I think two of the best operating principles that I'm thinking about as we return to whatever is going to emerge from this pandemic. We're still finding our way. We have lots of ideas and plans in motion, but it's still a point of discovery. What I'm hearing from the people that I work with and the students that I serve is kind of going back to basics in some sense. And that first and most important area is communication. And that communication has to instill clarity and stability. And that's a leadership essential capability, is to communicate, to create clarity and stability. That's what people are looking for right now. Moreover, some interesting norms, and I think productive norms, have been established for teams during this lockdown when we've all been working remotely for the most part. Many of us have. And some of those norms are really worth bringing back to the foreground as we come back to work, whatever form that takes. So building on some of the norms that have already been established, there's been some very, very creative ways that people have come together to build connectivity, to build community, and we should keep doing some of those things. And I think that as leaders, we can never over communicate, quite frankly. And so people are looking for kind of what to expect. And if we don't know, then we come together and we talk about what we need and try to work towards those needs, and to the degree that we can, even once. I think the obvious other best practice in operating principle is a great deal of flexibility. We've all been packing as much adaptability and resilience as we possibly can into our kind of toolkit during 2020 and early 2021. And now we also need to pack flexibility, because people, again, I mentioned a moment ago, are coming back at very different states emotionally and psychosocially. And so a lot of flexibility, a lot of compassion is going to be needed, I think, in the workforce going forward. And so as managers and leaders, business owners, parents, we're going to need to think about a lot of flexibility. So it's kind of an interesting thing. We need to offer clarity and stability while at the same time being very flexible. I think that's going to be our marching orders for some time now. And so those are the things that I'm thinking about right now as we return back to whatever the next kind of experience in our world is going to be.
It's interesting because to some degree, during COVID and people staying at home, we learned to be very inflexible, right? We only had to take care of ourselves and only our immediate family, only the people in our pod, only the people that we saw. And so one of the transition points in reentry is you actually have to be flexible around other people's needs. It's not only their timing needs, but their other needs as individuals that you're managing, children who've been raised during this time period, parents who are dealing with different situations. It's going to be a fascinating. You're a professor. I know that you'll be one of those people 10 years from now writing a book about what we learned during this time period. So I'm looking forward to reading that book when it comes out. So I've got three big questions for you as we wrap it up today. First one is, what women inspired you to break through?
Thank you. So when I think about this question, Lisa, I think really kind of two groups come together. So I think about the fierce women in my family, and I use that term very literally. My mother, my aunt, and my grandmother were, I used to say, made of nails and stones, because they were so tough. They grew up during difficult times, not dissimilar in some respects to the difficult time that we've been going through in the last year and a half. And I learned so much about them, from them, about resilience and about just not imploding, just keep going and don't let anything get in your way. It was all, sort of very subtle. They weren't just sort of these, overt directives, but just observing them. And that's what children do. They observe adults and learn from them so much. So I would say, first and foremost, the fierce women in my family taught me about breaking through barriers, but also my peers. I think I've been fortunate throughout my entire life, Karen Merrick being one of those people who was so instructive and so insightful, that I just glean so much from my peer group that teaches me every single day. Because I'm a learner, I surround myself with teachers, and my peers have been fantastic teachers and have enabled me to break through.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I know I greatly value my peer relationships throughout my life, and many people that I've worked with on numerous different occasions over the last 30 years. What is the number one thing you're doing to inspire the next generation of female leaders?
Yes, I put a lot of time and attention into this group of coming women who will be taking on more and more leadership responsibility. And so I challenge them through tough questions, and I encourage them to keep going, to not stop, and to use their power to realize their dreams. Because I think sometimes women get discouraged, at least some of my students do. And so I help them to think about, what is it that you really, really want? What is your dream? And getting clarity on that so that they can articulate with specificity what it is that they aim for. Because when I come across young women who aren't clear, then I tell them, that's not going to open doors for you. Only your sort of precise clarity about what it is you think you want to achieve. And that will change, but articulate something with clarity, because that's what opens doors for you. Ambiguity doesn't always open doors. If we're too ambiguous, then we're just depending on luck. But when we're clear, then we can enlist others in helping us to achieve those dreams. And so that's what I encourage young women to do, to not be vague, but to search for clarity, and to put yourself around those doing the kind of thing that you see yourself doing. That's a great way to learn and to also gain clarity.
Well, that's something that I'm going to actually take and use in the future. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece of advice. And it goes along with something you said earlier in our conversation, which is keep moving forward. It's funny, one of my favorite songs from Christmas shows is put one foot in front of the other and soon you'll be walking across the floor, put one foot in front of the other and soon you'll be walking out the door. And your message of clarity and not ambiguity really backs that up, of moving forward, but moving forward with a purpose. So as women are trying to break through, in some cases, women may be trying to re-enter the workforce. Maybe they're taking some time off over a period of time, but they want to come back in. What is the thing in that piece of advice that you would give to those individuals?
Yes, I think, there's several things. One thing I would want to say to women that are breaking through, returning, is that you are needed. You are so vitally needed in the workforce and in the world right now. The world needs your leadership. Someone right now is looking to you to lead. And so it is incumbent upon you to step up. Even if you don't feel prepared, it's okay. Step up and lead for those around you, whether it's your family members or your community or your organization. The world is longing for the leadership that women bring, absolutely longing for it. And so when you deny that, when you disallow that, you are robbing the world. I know it sounds so dramatic, but it's really true. You're robbing the world of what it's longing for right now at this particular time in history. Critically important. So step out, step out, step in, and figure out what is the difference that you want to make in the world, because there is something different that you want to add. I'm certain of it. And the world is looking for that right now.
Well, you sum this up perfectly. I think our message today is step out and step in, and we look forward to seeing what women do as a result of listening to our conversation. So thank you, Dr. Ledbetter. I really appreciate your being with us today.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been a joy. Thank you.